You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Tonight's story doesn't come from a backpacker or a late-night hiker. It comes from a family camping deep in the East Texas woods, where the trees stretch tall and sometimes something watches you back. Strange voices in the dark, a hand pressing against a tent, and a family that fled their campsite, vowing never to return. Debra returns to the podcast for part 2 to share more stories of people that have lived through encounters with Sasquatch. So stay with us.
I wanted to get into a few of my family ones. So I have a niece, and she and her mother, which is my sister, and her husband's cousin, a bunch of their friends, they all went out to East Texas. They live in East Texas, but they went farther east. Have you ever heard of the city called Gilmer out in East Texas?
Not off the top of my head, but I'm going to look it up real quick. You said Gilmer?
Gilmer. Gilmer. Yeah, there's one of the Eagles lives out there. Don Henley. Yeah, he's from Gilmer.
Okay, cool.
But anyway, so they all went camping, and they always take their trailers and their four-wheelers and their tents and all that kind of stuff. And they would go ride motorcycles and four-wheelers and camp for the weekend. And so everybody, they get there, they're putting up their tents, and my niece is like, well, we're going to put ours kind of farther out, kind of into the trees and into the forest, kind of away from everybody else. They had the 2 kids, and so they just kind of put theirs more out into the woods. Well, during the night, my niece gets woke up, and she's hearing all of this chatter on like there was a Bigfoot on one side of the camp and one on the other, and they're just talking back and forth. And so she's listening to that, and she's like, thinks they're speaking Russian or something. She doesn't know what it is. They're just chattering. And so she kind of freaks out, and she gets up and she puts her little girl between her and her husband. And she lays back down, and her back is against the back of the tent. And all of a sudden, this big hand presses in on the back of the tent and presses on her back. And so she jumps up, and she gets on her knees, and she's shaking her husband, get up, and she's just like shaking him. And she looks up, and the top of the tent is like pressing in towards her head. So she had a really bad night, didn't sleep the rest of the night. By the time it started getting daylight and all the chatter stopped and all of that kind of stuff, she kind of unzips. Her mother was a few tents away, and she was yelling for her mother, and her mother never heard her all night long. And so anyway, she gets up, and she undoes the zipper on the tent, and she looks out, and her husband's cousin is sitting there in a chair, and he's got his pistol out, and he's got it, cocked and pointing out in the woods. And so she gets up, and she goes out there and talks to him, and he had a bad night too. So whatever was messing with her was also over there messing with him. And so she gets her husband up, and they're all leaving, and she's like, I am not staying another night here. You're going to have to help me get everything packed up and the four-wheelers. And she goes, we're leaving. We're not staying here. And the cousin said, yeah, I'm leaving too. And he said, I'm never going camping again. As a matter of fact, I'm going to sell my four-wheeler. I will never come back out here. I will never camp again. I will never ride four-wheelers again. I will never come back here again. So that happened with them. And then so also out in East Texas, I have 3 sisters that live out in East Texas, and two of them are twins, and they were living at that time. They were living on a piece of property where my one twin sister had a house built. The other one was she had like probably a 35-foot travel trailer, and that's where she lived. And so so one of my sisters is sitting on her porch, and the other one is sitting in her travel trailer. And the one in the travel trailer is sitting on her couch doing something, and she looks up and she sees a gray Bigfoot walking across the farmer's field that was across the street. And she jumps up and she runs out. And my other sister, who was sitting on the porch, is facing the road with her house, and on the porch, she's facing the farmer's field, and she sees it, and they kind of meet in the driveway. And she's like, "Oh, get a key and let's follow it and see where it goes." So they follow it, and at the end of the road is the river. And also at the end of the road is a building. And so kind of like a commercial building, not a big one, but kind of a small one. So I don't know what they had in there or anything. And I didn't even think to ask, but so they get in their car and they're driving down there, and they couldn't see it anymore. But once they got to the building that was down there by that river, they see this man walking out from behind the building, and he's carrying a gun in his arms. And so they pull in the driveway, and he walks up to them, and they're like, "Did you see that Bigfoot? Did you see that Bigfoot?" And he's like, starts laughing at him. And he's like, "No, I didn't see a Bigfoot." And he's laughing, and he thinks it's funny. And both of them know what they saw, right? And he said, "No, I didn't see a Bigfoot," but he said, I work around here. He said, the owner of this property hires me to come out here and shoot the coyotes, because they keep getting coyotes on the land here. So, and they're like, "Yeah, we saw a Bigfoot, and it was gray, and we saw it walking across the farmer's field, and we jumped in the car, and we just followed it down here to the river. And then, we thought maybe you might have seen it too." And he goes, "No, I'm sorry, I didn't see it." So that was that story. And then, and so that same twin sister that lives in the travel trailer, she kept having something come up and slapping on her little travel trailer. And she would call and tell me about it. And I was like, "Wow, that's pretty crazy." And she's like, "Yeah." And she says, "One night, it came and it stepped on my bumper, and it raised up the front where the hitch is. And it says, she says, I was laying in my bed. And she said, it nearly rolled me out of my bed." And, I forget which end. I think she said it was on the bumper at the back. So, anyway, so she was telling me about that. And she goes, "What do I do?" And I said, "I don't know. I've watched some of these Bigfoot shows." And I said, "Some people say if you stack up 3 rocks, that it will, it'll basically mean peace, and, you don't want to be bothered anymore." And she said she did that, and it stopped bothering her. And she said then a few months later, maybe up to a year, she had a wild pig come up to her porch with part of its face torn off. And I remember her sending me the pictures of it. And it had gotten up on her porch, and it had knocked her rocks over. And so she started having problems again. And I said, "Well, you know what to do." I said, you go out there and you stack those. If it's not bothering you and you stack those rocks up, I said, you need to go out and do it again. I said, because if all the slapping on the side of your trailer and everything's starting up again, go out there and stack those rocks up again. I said, I don't know what else to tell you. So anyway, she did that, and she finally ended up selling that and moving to Alabama.
That's really incredible. That was East Texas.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, East Texas. And it wasn't very far from my house where my husband and I lived, where the cats got drowned and the what do you call those? The goats got massacred.
Oh, so it was
probably
Wolf City.
Yeah. Probably 15 minutes from there. And so anyway, I have another sister, an older sister, who is also a twin to another twin. My mom had 2 sets of twins. And so she was sitting, it was after midnight, I don't know, 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. And she's sitting in her spare room where her, it's got bunk beds in there. And when her grandkids come over to spend the weekend or whatever, they sleep in that room. And that's also where her computer is. So she was telling me that she called me up one day and she was telling me that she was sitting in there at her computer, and that all of a sudden she started hearing knocking on the window. She said, and I said, like knocking, like was somebody with knuckles? And she goes, absolutely somebody with knuckles, just like they were knocking on your front door, somebody with knuckles. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So I don't know, probably a month or so passes by, and my ex-husband and I go up, and we go up to visit her and her husband. And let me finish that story. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so she said that it scared her so bad, she jumped up and she ran in the bedroom, and she was shaking her husband, get up, there's somebody outside. And he goes, what do you mean? And she's like, well, somebody's out there knocking on my window. And he goes, it's nothing, just go to bed, So anyway, so then like a month or so later, my ex-husband and I go up there, and we're visiting, and we go out to eat with them, and just kind of spend the day with them. And I was asking her, I said, you remember when you called me and you told me about the knocking on your window? And she said, yeah. And I said, can you take me around and show me which window it was? And she's like, yeah. So we go around there, and that window, I'm 5'4", and that window, just like the bottom of it hits me right about the very top of my forehead, around my hairline. And so I kind of figured that whatever it was tall enough that it could see over the top part of that window and see her sitting at that desk, because it was knocking on that window and just scared the heck out of her. But like I said, I'm 5'4", and that window, the bottom of it hits me around the forehead. So let's see. Okay, so I think I've told you that one. And told you that one. Okay, so also you're going to see, I sent you two pictures of, one has a motor coach in it, and one has a picture of a Bigfoot sitting on a tree with no legs. That belonged to my brother. And my sister, that's on that same property where she was getting slapped on the, like the slapping, and then something standing on her bumper, raising up the front of her travel trailer. That's that same piece of land. And you'll see there's like a motor home out there. And if you look up in the tree, she took pictures of a Bigfoot sitting on a limb with no legs. And you can see, I know it's bad quality, but I used to have a better picture of that, but you can see it has no legs, but you can see its back, you can see its head. I mean, it's like, to me, the ones that I've seen of that have been really, really clear. The ones that she has, they were a lot more clear. So she got pictures, that same sister got pictures of that Bigfoot up in that tree. And she said she has seen things out in the forest behind. They had a pretty good size parcel of land there too that that they lived on. And so also down, speaking of thinking about the chickens and stuff again, I had like half of our shed is a chicken coop, half of it is a shed. And so it's like 8x8 for the chicken coop part, and 8x8 for the shed where you store all the chicken feed and kind of all of those things. And so if you open the shed door, you walk in and you'll see, and I sent you a picture of this, there's like a hen gear box. Like the chickens get up in there and they lay their eggs, and then you got a little metal door that opens on the top, and you can just pull all the eggs out. Uh-huh. Well, to keep the chickens from getting out, we had to build a door, put a piece of plywood across the top to, so the chickens wouldn't come through there or wouldn't get out. And so there's been times that I have gone into that chicken coop and I had no eggs. And remember, I told you I had anywhere from 40 to 80 chickens at any given time. I just, depending on when stuff got ate or my son let it. So anyway, but we've always had a good amount of eggs. And for like weeks, I would go down there and there was no eggs. And that the door that you can see, like the little metal door, that would be like left open. Whatever it was had hands and it would close the shed door back. But sometimes, like I would, like where the eggs are, and sometimes I would find eggs that have been taken out of the hen gear box and taken outside of the shed and laid on the ground in front of the door. Like you would have thought something dropped it, but it would have broke. So it had to set those something, whoever it was, whatever it was, sat those eggs down there on the ground. And I had pictures of those, but I those are all on my hard drive. And I can't get those off of there anymore.
Okay.
So
I want to address something real quick. I just saw the close-up picture of the Bigfoot above the motorhome. That's really intense. I mean, you can see the definition of the shoulder in the arm. That's a wild picture.
Yeah. Yeah, she had a few others that she sent me that were on my hard drive that I just can't get access to. Okay. And the only reason I had this is because these were on my old phone. And when I got a new phone, I was able to transfer some of those pictures over from my phone. Mm-hmm. But some of those got left on my hard drive. So I apologize for that. But
no problem. I don't know if you're still able to talk to her. I mean, I can't even imagine what a better quality version of that photo looks like. It's got to be intense.
Yeah, it would be. I can ask her and see if she has it.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
So, also with the chicken coop, it has netting across the top so that no predators can get in there, no owls or hawks or. We had Cooper hawks and owls and stuff killing our chickens there for a little while. So we had to buy a net to put over the top, and it's on there pretty darn good. And we didn't really ever have any problems after that. But so one day I went down there to feed, and I had roosters. It's the chicken run is divided in. It's a pretty big chicken yard, and it's covered across the top, and it's got, I think, the walls on the sides, the fencing. It was hog wire, and then that's covered in chicken wire, and then on top of that is hardware cloth because we kept having predators biting heads off our chickens, so we had to keep reinforcing, the wiring around them because, if a chicken sticks its head out and a weasel or something else gets it, So anyway, we had to keep taking measures to predator proof our chicken thing. So we have it divided into half, and half of it on the left side is a bunch of roosters, and they have my son used to have this big cane Corso Mastiff dog. And she had this massive dog house. So on one side we have the dog house, and on the other side we have the hens, where the hens can either get up under the chicken coop or walk up a little ladder and go in there and sleep in the actual coop for the night. So one day I walked down there, and I'm looking at the roosters, and I just kind of glanced down, and there is scat inside the rooster pen, and it's broken into half, and each half is like 4 or 5 inches long, and it's black. And so we have all of that protection around every wall. We have the top completely covered, and nothing can get in and nothing can get out, only through the gates. And there's 2 gates. So there's one gate that walks into the hen's pen. And then if you walk all the way on the other side of the hen's pen, there's the gate that goes into where the roosters are. No roosters were killed. Everything was just normal as it could be, except for there was some animals scat in there. And it was very long, but it was broken into two pieces. Like I said, each piece was probably 4 to 5 inches long. And I think I sent you a picture of that. And so my sister, the one that lived in East Texas, that she now lives in Alabama. And she's had some weird stuff happen there too, at least one thing that I remember. But there was, what do you call it? There was her idea, because I couldn't figure out how it got in there, because what kind of animal can get in there and go to the bathroom and then get back out when you only have to go through a gate or 2 gates to get in there? And so anyway, she said that she thinks that the juvenile Sasquatch that's been messing with the yarn, that's been doing the rocks behind the truck, that had the little footprints down there in the down behind where we parked the vehicles and stuff, everything down in there. She thinks that maybe it found that or it came from that and it picked it up and threw it through the fence to feed it to the chickens or to the roosters. That just as good a theory as any, because I really can't explain it. And I talked to my sons about it. My sons are in their 40s, and it's like, my oldest son said, well, maybe a big cat or a coyote or something climbed on top of the chicken coop and shed and hung its behind over the edge and just went to the bathroom like that. And I was like, well, I guess I don't know how it would get up there or get down, but I guess that's just as plausible as anything else, because I can't explain it and I don't know how it happened. So the next thing that happened, so I'm sitting in my bedroom and I'm looking out, and I had some little hens that were getting bullied by all the other chickens, and they're like getting their feathers plucked out and everything. So I went in and got them, and I built this little, what you call a chicken tractor. It's just like a little square framed thing with hardware cloth all the way around it and a door that opens on the top. And so anyway, I was trying to let these hens heal a little bit. So I kind of have a routine. I get up every morning, I open my blinds, I have my coffee. Well, one morning I look out and there is a black creature, and I sent you that picture. There's a black creature bent over, and I had this tarp over the top of the this little chicken tractor. And So by the time I opened the blinds and saw it, the tarp had already been moved, and this thing was bent over looking inside. And I took a picture of it with my phone, because I was like, what in the world is that? And so then I kind of took that picture and I zoomed in on it. I got my shoes on and was running downstairs as fast as I could. And by the time I got out the door, it was gone. But I wanted to make sure that I got a picture of it before I left. But anyway, by the time I got down there, it was gone. And I don't know what that was, but you can see it has a horrible, evil, wicked looking head on it, like a devil or something to me. So,
it's a darker creature to the right of the tarp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You can see it kind of bent over looking in there.
Yep. Wow.
And so, yeah, it had moved the tarp and was looking up under there at the chickens. So I don't know. I always hear everybody ask, what do you think it is? What is it? What do you think it is? And, my brain goes in so many different directions. It's like part of me thinks, well, maybe it is a multi-dimensional being and it's, this or that. But then I go, well, I don't know. It eats animals, and it eats, it kills deer, and it takes the deer away from the hunters, and it, does all of these, things that are more of a physical being, not a multi-dimensional being. And then, then I go, well, is it Nephilim? Can they be one type of being one time and then go to a physical being the next time? I hope that makes sense.
No, so, I totally get it. There's something I want to ask you real quick. You mentioned that you've had a telepathy experience. Has that happened
Yeah.
more than once at that property?
Nope. That's
Oh, wow.
my one and only time in my whole life.
Wow.
Nothing before that and nothing after that. But all it said was look up in the trees. So that was the only time. Okay, so when I was probably 11 or 12, my sisters had, and their husbands, they were friends with a man that worked with their husbands. They all worked at the same company. And so they all kind of made friends over the years. She was telling me about being her family went camping, and they had like one of the what do you call those, travel trailer. So they had a travel trailer, and they would go take their kids camping at the lake every year. And I don't remember some lake here in Texas. I don't remember which one. Could have been Lake Texoma. I just don't remember. But because we all live in the same area, And so anyway, she was telling me that they went camping, and that she was, it was her time of the month, and she was having cramps, and the rest of her family, her mom and dad and her siblings, they all were going to go walk around the lake. And so she didn't feel good, so she was going to stay in the trailer. And she said after her parents or her family had been gone, 20 or 30 minutes or something, she said she could hear the doorknob on the travel trailer wiggling back and forth. And she was like, thought, it was a human, and that somebody was fixing to come in and hurt her. And so she was small enough. I don't remember how old she said she was at the time, but she was small enough she could get up under one of the cabinets or in one of the cabinets. And so she said a actual Bigfoot came inside, and it was just like pacing up and down, back and forth, in the floor, in the middle, how they, like, you have like a table on one side and a couch on the other side. Well, anyway, there was like this little hall through there, for lack of better words. She had this little thing through the, and it just kept pacing back and forth, up, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it finally went, I guess it couldn't find her, and it finally left, and she jumped up and locked the door and stuff when it was gone. And when her parents got back, she was so terrified. She just wanted, all she wanted to do was go home. And I remember her telling me nobody believed her either. So, also, during the time that we had the house built here, and my son, they were clearing land for ponds and doing all these other things. Well, one of the pieces of heavy equipment broke down. And so a guy from Caterpillar came up here, and he was working on it, and I had to leave and go into town. So I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to be so embarrassed having to mention this to him, but it's probably better that I say something than not say something. So anyway, I drove down to the back of the property where he was working on this broken down piece of equipment. And I said, hey, how you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm good. And I was like, well, I just wanted to tell you that I'm fixing to go into town, and there won't be anybody here. So, but I said, the reason I'm telling you this is because we've had some really weird things happening here. And I said, I just wanted to tell you so you can kind of be on alert, and be aware of your surroundings. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? And I said, we've seen Bigfoot here. We've seen other creatures. I said, we don't really know what they all are. I said, but I just wanted to, let you know so you can kind of be aware of your surroundings. And, if you see something moving or whatever, just be aware that some weird things have happened around here. And I just wanted to, let you know so you can kind of keep an eye out, and be safe. And he's like, oh, I appreciate that. And he goes, really, y'all saw Bigfoot? And I said, yeah, we've seen a few of them. And he said, well, he said, I'll tell you this. He said, my friend works for one of those companies that, like a laboratory, and they collect snake venom. He said, so my friend goes and collects all these poisonous snakes all around Texas, and then he takes them, and then they get all of the venom out of the fangs, and then he takes them back out, and then he releases them back out in the wild. He said, so one night I go with him, and, you know, we're walking along, and he said he's got his flashlight out, and he said there was this part of the trail, and he said it just kind of dropped off, like, he said, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 foot or something. And he said, this thing was standing right where it dropped off, and he said it had to be over 10 foot tall, because when he shined the flashlight on it, he said he could just like shine up, like, you know, like at first he may have been shining on its chest or something, because they were on the higher ground and it was standing down below. So he was trying to explain to me that the friend went up with the flashlight until he got to this thing's face, and he said they both saw it and took off running, and he said it scared the heck out of him. He says, I know they exist. I've seen it myself now. So that was the experience with the caterpillar guy, the technician. So I have a younger sister, and we have this mulcher, and all these trees, we were trying to figure out what to do with all of them. So my ex-husband, he goes and he buys this mulcher. And so, you know, they feed all these tree limbs and things into this mulcher, and we, you know, let it sit for a few years and make, you know, compost for the garden. Or sometimes we take big bucket loads of it with a skid steer, and we drop it over we pull back the netting and we put it in there for the chickens, and they pick through it and get the bugs out and all that. Well, anyway, so my sister was working on her garden. I think it was 2 years ago. Well, it may have been last year, actually. Yeah, I think it was last year. And so we're all standing down at the pond, and which is down by the chicken coop, and we're just kind of looking over, you know, the pond, and all of a sudden it's like a small tree limb, and a really big stick, and it just comes flying over all 3 of our heads and lands in the pond, and you can hear this thing going whoop, 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 like that, and it was thrown with some force. And we all just like turned around and started looking. Of course, you know, there's a lot of trees and stuff. We don't know where it came from, but this thing flew over our heads and landed right in the pond. And
Debra, sorry, yeah? Real quick. The noise that you just made, was that the noise of whatever threw it, or the noise of it like going over and over in the air?
Yeah, the noise of it going over and over in the air.
Thank you.
Okay, so in Oklahoma, my brother-in-law grew up in Oklahoma, and they lived, I think he said, either near the Kiamichi Mountains or in the Kiamichi Mountains. But anyway, his mother was, I can't remember if I think he said he was a teenager, but his mother was standing in the kitchen, and she was cooking dinner, and their back door flies open, and then a Bigfoot steps inside, and he's standing there looking at the mother, and the mother's looking at him, and he just glances down and sees a canister of flour sitting on the counter, and he just grabs that canister of flour and runs back out the door. So that was what happened with my brother-in-law. And so they never gave me a description of what it looked like, and I never even thought to ask. But his mother has been long gone. But I guess I should have thought to ask back then. But my dad, the next stories that I have are from Arkansas, and my dad was born in 1915. And so I think he was like 17 or 18 during the Great Depression. And so he and his brother, they were moonshiners. They had like 300 or 400 acres in Gurdon, Arkansas. And it was down by the Ouachita River ran through their place in Gurdon, Arkansas. And so one of the experiences was they had a cabin down by the river that they had they would stay down there sometimes at night. And they got up one morning and opened up the door and was just walking out, to go tend to their fields and their still. And there was an auburn-colored Bigfoot standing in the front yard or walking across the front yard of this cabin. And so there was another time that they were, I don't think they had gone into the cabin yet, but they were out. They had like a one of those cast iron Dutch ovens on a campfire, and they were making beef stew. And they had horses, and they had their dogs there. And let's see, he said that they could hear this thing walking towards them, and it was just like laying over trees, like a bulldozer, like bam, 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 just laying over these trees. And he said it got close to them. Their dogs started barking and ran off, and then their horses were rearing up. And he said he took the little wire handle that goes on those Dutch ovens, and he just kind of stuck it up in a tree over a where a tree limb used to be or something, or on a tree limb. I forgot what he said. But anyway, they were looking and seeing this dark figure coming out of the trees. I think he said from the other side of the river. I'm trying to recall. But and then they got on their horses and they rode away, and they come back the next morning, and this thing of beef stew was already, like, it had sat there and ate the whole thing of beef stew. So that was that. And then I have that was the two things that happened to my dad down at the Wichita River. And then my sister lives in Alabama, and she moved there probably I'm going to say about 3 or 4 years ago. And she started attending a church there. And the minister came, and his wife came over to visit her. And he was telling her the story about how he likes to go kayaking in the bay there near where she lives. And so, because the property with her family there, it's the back of their property backs up to the bay. And she was telling me that he told her that he was carrying his canoe and he was walking down this trail to get to the water, and two men come running past him going the other direction, and they were telling him that he needs to turn around and leave because there's a creature down there, and it has he says it has a more of a human body, but it has a dog's head.
Oh man.
And so yeah. And so they were running past him and telling him, don't go down there. So that was another thing that happened to my sister, the one that lived in the travel trailer in East Texas, that had all that stuff happen to her. And so last year, I was going to tell you, some stuff happened to me. I lived in Washington State last year, and with my boyfriend, and we had some strange things happen in there. Like one morning, I got up and I went outside with my coffee, and it's just so beautiful there. I just love it there. And I would get my coffee and I would go and just sit on the riding mower, and I would just listen to the birds and play with our dog. Plus, the neighbors' dogs would come over and play all the time. And so I was sitting on the mower, and I heard a tree knock, and I was like, is that a tree knock? Because my boyfriend's land, it sloped down, like he was on a mountain, and it sloped down, and then it dropped off into a deep canyon. And so I was, and then on the other side of the canyon is like this great big, huge, tall cliff, and there's like nothing on the other side of that. It's just like a giant wall, and if that makes any sense. Like you can just look, and it's just like a wall. So, a cliff, yeah. And so, so I was hearing wood knocks, and I was like, oh my gosh, is that a wood knock? So I jump off the mower, and I'm trying to get my phone open and putting in my code and doing all this stuff, trying to get my phone, get the camera going. And finally I start recording and I start getting these wood knocks, and it was really, really good ones. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that one. If you listen real close, you'll hear something go like that, like a, I don't know if you would call it a gurgle or a, oh, what do they call that? It's not a growl. It's like a, what do they call that? Oh, I forgot. But you could hear this thing make a kind of a weird noise while it's tree knocking down there. You can actually hear like some kind of weird vocalization. And so, and then another morning I got up and I went outside, and there was like 5 or 6 apples in the driveway, and every one of them had like half of it bitten off. And I was like, we don't have apple trees, and we go over and we hang out with the neighbors, and they don't have apple trees, so I didn't know where the apples came from. So when my boyfriend woke up, I got up early. I usually am an early bird. So when he came outside, I was showing him, I said, do you see all these apples in the driveway? And he's like, yeah, where'd those come from? And I said, I don't know. We don't have apple trees. And he goes, yeah, the neighbors don't have any either. I was like, yeah, I know, right? And so we're just kind of standing there, scratching our heads. He goes, I know what happened. I said, what? And he goes, I think that there were like 5 or 6 deer, and they were all walking, and they were carrying these apples in their mouth. And then when a car came up the road, the car scared them, and they all dropped their apples, and they all took off running. And I said, I don't think deer run with apples in their mouth, and I don't think deer bite the apples in half and throw them on the ground. So anyway, that was a couple of things that happened while I was there. So when I got back home, my boyfriend calls me up, and he's like, hey, babe, guess what? And I said, what? And he goes, I saw 2 Bigfoot. I was like, no, you didn't. And he goes, yeah, I did. He goes, I think you brought them with you. He said, because I've lived here all of my life, and I've lived in this house for at least 30 years. And he said, I've never seen anything like that ever before. And I said, well, really, what happened? He goes, you know how they lifted that burn ban, and, we finally were able to start burning some of our brush. He said, well, I had started a fire, and I kept, all day long and into the evening, I kept putting brush in this pile so I could get it all burnt. And he said, about 2:00 in the morning, I was like, wow, I better go down there and check on that fire and make sure, I don't catch the neighbor's house on fire or something. He just wanted to go down and, just kind of keep an eye on things. So he goes down there, and he's got his flashlight and his dog, and he walks up to the fire, and he shines his flashlight, and he starts seeing four red eyes. And he said, I knew what they were. He said, and I said, well, about how big were they? And he goes, they were probably every bit of 7 or 8 foot tall. And I said, well, how far apart were they? And he goes, they were probably from shoulder to shoulder. They were about 1 foot apart. And I said, well, what'd you do? And he goes, I started yelling at him, get out of here, get out of here. And I said, so did they go? And he goes, no, they just kept standing there near the fire. And he said, I could see them standing by the fire, and, and I just kept yelling, and they wouldn't go. And I said, so what'd you do? And he goes, I ran in the house, and I got my pistol, and I came back out and got a better flashlight. And I said, well, then what? And he said, well, they were still there. And he said, I was yelling at them, you better go on, I have a pistol, you better go. And he said, they just stood there and stared at me with those red eyes, and they wouldn't go. And I said, you should have just left them alone and just went and stayed in the house. And I said, because, that's really dangerous to go down there like that. And he took the pistol, and he just started kind of shooting. He wasn't shooting at them, but he was just kind of shooting to get them to leave. And I don't know how he didn't wake up all the neighbors, because he was just frantic shooting, and he just kept yelling at them and shooting. And I mean, he probably was using his little 22, but it was still loud. He had these little 22 pistols. So anyway, he said he just kept yelling at them and yelling at them, and they just kept standing there. He said finally they both started walking, and they walked up the hill where the house was and towards the cars, where, you know, like where he has his cars parked. So anyway, he walked up the he said they walked so slow. It was almost like they were gliding. It was just so slow. And so anyway, he couldn't believe it. And he's like, I think you brought them here with you. And I said, what are you saying? Because I'm saying you brought them here with you because I never had them here before. And I said, I bet you did, and you just didn't notice. I said, because, you know, I mean, if you pair that with that pile of apples, and then you pair it with me recording the wood knockings that I showed you that I recorded, I said, you know, they were probably there all along. And so anyway, that was kind of all that happened with him there. But his dad, before he died last year, was living up in Olympia. And I think he said a few years before his dad died, he said his dad was like leaving his house to drive into town. And his dad like had a beach house there. And so he drove up was driving into town to get some stuff. And he said he was just kind of on the dirt road and looked up and was, you know, looking at his rearview mirror. And he said one of them just like went walking right behind him. And he could see it in his rearview mirror. So, and that was up in Olympia. So I think that is everything I have now. And like I said, I've talked to the sheriff about it. I've talked to the sheriff's wife about it. And, you know, they've said people have also reported some strange things. And, you know, when my son put up these cameras all over the property, I forgot to tell you this one, but something set off one of the cameras in the driveway, and you don't see anything, but you hear a grunt. Grunt. That's what I was trying to tell you, that at the wood knot, on that wood knot video, if you listen to it, you'll hear the grunt. It's a grunt. I couldn't think of it.
Okay.
But anyway, that's pretty much all I have. I guess that's probably enough.
This is absolutely incredible. The amount of encounters that you have gathered from across the country over the years is very, very impressive. You have some very cool connections. I mean, just in your relatives, really. But we've got to keep in touch with stuff that happens down there. I'm blown away by that, the stuff that you have going on there. But I mean, thank you so much for taking your time this afternoon to share. And I would say, you know, the stories you shared, even the relatives, I don't know if they would ever need to talk to anyone, but I mean, anyone that that you know that has had some things happen, you're more than welcome to pass on my info if they need someone to talk to about it. But thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll definitely keep in touch. It sounds like you've got wild stuff going on, and I'd love to hear more about it. But thank you so much for hanging out today, Debra.
You're welcome, Jeremiah. Thanks for having me on.
Just wanted to take a minute to say thank you truly for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Debra's story reminds us why East Texas is one of the most active and chilling Bigfoot hotspots around. So huge thanks to Debra for sharing not just one story, but a lifetime of experience that leave no doubt that we are not alone in the woods. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the channel on YouTube and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes, and share this one with a friend who loves cryptid mysteries or Texas lore. If you're tuning in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show, and if you'd be willing to leave a review, it really helps new listeners find us. And hey, if you or someone you know has had a Bigfoot encounter, especially around East Texas or the Kiamichi Mountains of Oklahoma, shoot me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your story. And also, don't forget, Sasquatch Summerfest is happening July 11th through the 12th at Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon, and Bigfoot Society listeners can grab a 2-day pass for the price of a 1-day admission with code BFS at checkout. Tickets are available now at www.sasquatchsummerfest.com. Huge thanks to Priscilla and the team for making that happen. And thanks again for being part of the Bigfoot Society. Until next time, keep your ears open, your head on a swivel, and never stop wondering what might be out there, and see you in the woods.